They found his teeth before they found his name. A cold alley behind the chop suey palace, lit only by the flicker of a dying neon sign. Blood soaked into the snow, steam still curling off it. Dutch Schultz had always been the ghost with a gun, but tonight, he was the body with no face. The .38 slug shattered his jaw, blew the gold caps clean out. 2 men fled, their footsteps lost in the wail of sirens. Dutch had built an empire out of fear, rackets, and dirty whiskey. He made enemies of everyone, from the Bronx to the Commission. And now, the king of numbers lay twitching in his own crimson snow. A waitress screamed. A drunk stumbled out and dropped his bottle. One bullet tore open the silence, another shattered history. Dutch gasped through blood, Mother of God. Then silence. It didn't matter who pulled the trigger. The real story started with the first betrayal, the first drop of blood spilled long before this alley ever knew his name. Before he became Dutch Schultz, they called him Arthur Flegenheimer, a Bronx kid, born to nothing, made from hunger. His father vanished when he was 14, left a silence in the house that screamed every night. Arthur hated weakness, hated being forgotten. He dropped out, hustled bread deliveries, made his first illegal dollar before he could vote. The city was broken. The law was a myth. So he carved out his truth in nickels and knives. By 18, he had scars older than his enemies. By 20, he had enemies older than his mother. They said he was cold. They were wrong. He burned like a furnace under a skin of steel. There was no plan B. There was no backup. Just Dutch, and the world he was about to take. Dutch learned early that violence was faster than trust. He didn't ask permission. He took what he needed. His first job was running beer during Prohibition, ducking cops and swinging fists at rivals. He ran with small-time thugs, but his brain was wired for empire. The bosses laughed at him, until he bought their silence in lead. He didn't just break legs. He made deals, merged crews, blackmailed aldermen. The Bronx turned into his chessboard. Every pawn paid up. Every king bled. By the time the Commission noticed him, he already had more soldiers than Capone's West End. But Dutch didn't care for rules. Not theirs. Not God's. He only bowed to fear. And in New York City, fear had a new landlord. His name was whispered more than spoken. Dutch Schultz. The butcher of the Bronx. Cops knew better than to chase him. Judges got envelopes. Juries got silenced. And the streets bent when Dutch walked. He paid his men well, but made examples out of anyone who crossed him. The stories were legend. The man he buried alive, the officer found headless, the runner who disappeared mid-shift. But Dutch didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He sharpened his empire like a blade. Every move precise, every partner temporary. He had no friends, only tools. And he kept them razor sharp or discarded them broken. But no king rules forever. Inside the Commission, whispers grew. Dutch was too wild, too greedy. He refused to bow. Luciana warned him once. Then again. Dutch spit on the warning and expanded into Harlem, muscling into numbers rackets already promised. It was suicide. But Dutch didn't care. If they come for me, he said, I'll bury them before they know it. What he didn't know was, they already had a grave dug. A man who fights everyone dies alone. And Dutch? He didn't believe in alliances. Just bullets. And numbers. She was the only softness left in him. Anna.I. A jazz singer with a smoke-drenched voice and eyes like storm clouds. Dutch met her at the Roseland Ballroom, her song slicing through the noise like silk through steel. For a moment, the empire disappeared. He wasn't Dutch Schultz, just Arthur, broken and breathless. Anna didn't care about power. She saw the cracks beneath the crime, the boy who watched his father vanish, who built a fortress out of blood. He took her home that night, and every night after. But even love couldn't tame the storm. "They'll come for you," she whispered. He lit a cigarette with shaking hands. "Let them try." He kissed her like a man drowning, already knowing the water had no bottom. Dutch gave Anna a penthouse on Riverside Drive. Big windows. Bigger silence. She filled it with records, orchids, and books he never read. Most nights he came home late, blood under his fingernails, rage behind his eyes. She didn't ask. He didn't offer. But when she sang in that living room, time slowed. Even the ghosts stayed quiet. Once during a thunderstorm she asked, "Do you ever think about stopping?" He said nothing for a long while, just stared at the lightning reflecting off the glass. "If I stop, I disappear." Anna touched his cheek. Maybe disappearing ain't the worst thing. He pulled away. That night he didn't sleep beside her. He stared out the window until morning, waiting for the rain to stop. Dutch's crew feared him, but they feared Benny Knuckles more. A tank in a trench coat, Benny handled the messes Dutch didn't touch. They met in a pool hall during a brawl over a busted cue. Benny broke the man's jaw and asked Dutch for a drink. That was loyalty. Dutch gave Benny everything: money, power, bodies to bury. But even Benny had doubts. "Harlem's heatin' up," he said one night. "You're poking a hornet's nest." Dutch laughed. "Hornets die like everyone else." Benny lit a cigar and muttered, "Yeah, but they sting first." That was the last warning Benny ever gave. After that he followed orders like a soldier marching into a war no one could win. Dutch ran numbers out of Harlem like a banker counts coins, precise, ruthless, unstoppable. But it wasn't just business. It was invasion. Bumpy Johnson ran Harlem before Dutch ever walked its blocks. Dutch sent muscle. Bumpy sent coffins. But war cost money, and Dutch was tired of bleeding. So he called a truce. They met in a church basement, candles flickering between them. Dutch said, "There's enough bread for both of us." Bumpy lit a cigarette off the altar and said, "Just don't try to butter my slice." They shook hands. For now. Trust was a language they never spoke. But the city paused. Two kings shared one block, knives still tucked beneath the table. The empire grew. So did the cracks. Dutch's men were rich, loud, and sloppy. One got picked up by the cops and taught. Another skimmed off the books. Dutch made him disappear, body found floating in the East River, missing hands. Anna begged him to slow down. He kissed her, promised he would, then broke it the next day. The pressure was mounting. Luciana watched from the shadows. Federal eyes circled from rooftops. The world was shrinking. Dutch drank more, slept less. His fists clenched in his sleep. Even Benny looked at him different. The machine was overheating. And Dutch. He kept pressing the gas. Dutch had money, muscle, and momentum. But Harlem wasn't enough. He pushed into Midtown, shaking down clubs, bribing cops two at a time. He didn't ask any more, he demanded. Anyone who said no ended up gone or worse. He pulled his crew tighter, swore at Benny for questioning him, slapped a dealer who brought in short money. The violence wasn't surgical now, it was wildfire. Dutch was no longer building. He was consuming. One night, he walked into a rival bar with 6 men, ordered whiskey, and when the owner hesitated, Dutch shot him in the kneecap and poured his own drink. "Business," he said, "is about respect." Respect now wore a bulletproof vest. And every corner of New York whispered his name in fear. Not all. The law finally blinked. Prosecutor Thomas Dewey was young, clean-cut, and didn't fear the mob. While other men took bribes, Dewey sharpened knives. He came after Dutch with subpoenas, raids, and witnesses in the dark. Dutch laughed at first, sent roses to Dewey's office with a note, "Hope you live long enough to smell 'em." But Dewey didn't blink. He built a case brick by bloody brick. Dutch's bank accounts were unsealed. Runners were flipped. Benny said, "This kid's gonna bury us." Dutch lit a cigar and grinned. "Then I'll bury him first." Dewey had made it personal. That was his mistake. And Dutch's. The courtroom was a circus. Dutch wore tailored suits and smirked at the jury, like they were his bartenders. He cracked jokes, laughed too loud. The press called him the Mad Hatter of Mobland. Dewey called him the most dangerous man in New York. Dutch's lawyers stalled. His men threatened witnesses. The jury got scared. One morning, a juror's car exploded. Nobody was inside, but the message was clear. The trial dragged for weeks. Dutch made it a show. He'd already decided. If he lost in court, he'd kill Dewey himself. Not order it, do it. He was tired of shadows. Next time I shake his hand, Dutch said, I'll be holding a pistol. They beat the case. Jury deadlocked, Mistrial declared. Dutch walked out grinning like a devil in pinstripes. The commission wasn't laughing. He had made them all look vulnerable. The rules were sacred. No heat, no headlines. Dutch had broken both. Luciano called a meeting. No one told Dutch. They voted. He had to go. Not because they hated him, but because he'd become a liability. An unpredictable fire in a room full of oil drums. Dutch didn't know it yet, but his days were now numbered. Not in years, not in months. In bullets. Dutch came home that night, drunk, soaked in rain, laughing to himself. They can't touch me, he said. Anna watched him from the kitchen, silent, arms crossed. He spun her around, kissed her forehead. We won, he whispered. But his eyes were wild. She didn't answer. She knew something he didn't. She'd overheard a call. Luciano's men were circling. She wanted to scream, to run, to beg him to disappear. But Dutch didn't believe in fear. He believed in fire. She reached for his hand. He pulled away. I need to think, he muttered. Anna stood alone as he disappeared into the dark. Somewhere, a clock began to tick. Benny Knuckles stopped calling. Dutch didn't notice at first. He had other fires to put out. But when he needed muscle for a Harlem shakedown, and Benny didn't show, the silence screamed louder than any bullet. Anna said, He's gone. Dutch slammed a glass against the wall. He wouldn't. But he did. Benny had met with Luciano. A quiet dinner. No bodyguards. No threats. Just a simple deal. Immunity, money, and a new life out west. In return, Benny told them everything. Routes, hideouts, stash houses. He said, Dutch is already a dead man. I'm just trying to survive the funeral. Loyalty had an expiration date. And Dutch? He never saw the rot from within. Dutch confronted Anna. Not about Benny, but about everything. The distance. The looks. The silence. You talk to someone, he demanded. Anna stood still, arms folded. You think I'd trade you? Dutch's voice cracked. Everyone else has. She didn't answer. That was her answer. Truth doesn't shout. It just stands there. He gripped her wrists. She didn't flinch. I stayed, she whispered. But I'm not blind. Dutch let go. Stepped back. That night he sat alone at the bar, watching her sing through a haze of gin. He remembered when her voice made the world stop. Now, it just sounded like goodbye. A rat was in the house. Dutch found a ledger missing. Then a cop who shouldn't have known a thing mentioned a warehouse by name. Dutch's rage hit like thunder. He lined his men against the wall, eyes scanning, jaw twitching. One of you talks, he growled. Silence. Then, a twitch. Mikey the Blade, blinking too fast. Dutch didn't wait. The shot echoed before Mikey could blink again. The others didn't move. Dutch said nothing, just turned and left, boots tracking blood. But paranoia doesn't end with one bullet. It multiplies. That night, Dutch slept with the lights on, his pistol under the pillow, and trussed 6 feet underground. Anna packed a suitcase. No words. Just silence and motion. Dutch came home early, saw the bag, saw her back. Where? He asked. She turned, tears already dry. Some place without shadows. He laughed once, bitter. There's no such place. She walked to him, placed a hand on his chest. Then I'll walk in daylight. He wanted to stop her. Wanted to scream. But what do you say when you've already killed every reason to stay? The door closed with the softness of a final breath. And for the first time in years, Dutch felt cold. That same night, a kid, barely 20, walked into Dutch's Harlem office pretending to deliver whiskey. Inside the box was a message. A single black rose, dripping ink. Dutch stared at it for a long time. Benny's handwriting on the tag. Sleep light. Dutch didn't flinch. He poured a drink, lit a cigarette, and whispered to the air, "Come and get me." But inside, something shifted. It wasn't fear. It was clarity. The end wasn't coming. It was already here. The city had turned against him. The commission had written him off. The people he trusted had vanished. All that remained was the legend. And the bullet with his name already carved into the casing. Dutch bought a gun. Not for show, not for his men. This one was personal. Polished steel. Handle worn just right. He tucked it inside his coat, kissed it like a priest kisses a cross. Dewey was still breathing, still filing paperwork to bury him legally. Dutch had tried court. Now he'd try fate. One shot, he whispered. One clean shot. But no one wanted him to do it. Benny warned the commission. Luciano sent word, if Dutch touched Dewey, they'd kill him before sunrise. Dutch didn't care. He stood outside Dewey's office for 3 hours one morning, staring at the front door, hand trembling inside his coat. But when the lawyer finally walked out, surrounded by press and police, Dutch turned away. Not because he couldn't, because it would have made him small. And Dutch wasn't built to die small. Luciano called the meeting final. Dutch wasn't invited. Benny sat in the corner, silent, jaw clenched. The others voted with cold faces, no speeches, no arguments. Dutch had become the storm they needed to silence. It ends tonight, Luciano said. No blood tomorrow. They sent Charlie, the bug workman, and Lulu Rosenkrantz, men who didn't miss, men who didn't talk. Dutch had made peace with the wrong gods for too long. Now the real ones were coming. No angels. No devils. Just men with hollow eyes and full clips. The plan was clean. Hit him in Newark while he was cornered by paranoia and whiskey. And this time, he wouldn't see it coming. That night, Dutch sat in the Palace Chop House in Newark, drunk, muttering nonsense. He rambled about taxes and Roosevelt, the Constitution and German beer. His men, Lou and the bug among them, laughed like they were friends. He didn't see the guns. He didn't sense the shift in air. Not even when Lulu stood and said, "Bathroom." The bug followed. Minutes later, the lights flickered. Gunshots cracked through the back hallway. Dutch stood confused, eyes wide. A bullet tore through his side. He staggered, hit the wall. Blood bloomed on his vest. "Mother of God," he whispered, collapsing. Lulu stood over him, but the second bullet misfired. They fled. Dutch didn't die. Not yet. They rushed him to the hospital. He mumbled incoherently, slipping in and out of consciousness. Reporters swarmed. Cops watched from the halls. The doctors tried to save him, but the damage was already done. One nurse leaned close as he muttered about the Bible, taxes, and his mother. Was he confessing? She asked. No one knew. Dutch, the storm, the king, the madman, was unraveling one memory at a time. Anna didn't come. Benny didn't call. Only his lawyer showed up, pale and shaking. "Is he gonna talk?" one detective whispered. The lawyer shook his head. "He's already gone." Dutch would live a little longer. But the legend had already bled out. Dutch Schultz died alone. No priest. No ceremony. Just silence. He didn't die with a bang. He faded like smoke from a match. The papers called it the end of a tyrant. But the streets knew better. Dutch was a storm that broke itself apart. Anna read about it in the paper. She lit a cigarette and whispered, "Told you the shadows would catch you." Benny sat in a bar upstate, staring at his drink for hours, never touching it. Luciano never said his name again. The commission moved on. But in every alley where blood dried fast, in every whispered threat over whiskey and fear, Dutch lived on. Not as a man, but as a warning. Dutch was buried in an unmarked grave in Woodlawn Cemetery. No priest, no headlines, no family. Just the wind and the dirt. Cops didn't bother attending. His crew had vanished. His enemies didn't celebrate. They'd already moved on. A groundskeeper found a faded rose laid atop the grave a week later. No note. Just petals soaked from rain. The city didn't mourn Dutch Schultz. It exhaled, as if a sickness had passed. But the silence left behind wasn't peace. It was memory. Heavy. Sharp. Dutch hadn't been erased. He'd been absorbed into the bones of New York. A whisper. A rumor. A shadow cast longer than any man should ever throw. Anna moved to Chicago under a new name. She never sang again. Never spoke of him. But every now and then she'd walk past a bar playing jazz and pause for a single breath, eyes closed, hands clenched. She kept a photo of him tucked inside a poetry book, pages yellowed and creased. When a reporter found her years later and asked about Dutch Schultz, she only said, "He wanted the world and forgot how to hold a hand." Then she shut the door. Anna carried no fame, no fortune. Only scars shaped like songs never finished. In the end, she wasn't his weakness. She was his truth. And the truth always walks away in silence. Benny Knuckles bought a diner in Ohio. Ran it clean. No violence. No stories. Just coffee and eggs. Locals never knew who he was. But sometimes, late at night, he'd sit in the back, hands folded, eyes locked on the door. Waiting. Not for customers, for ghosts. A kid once asked him about the scar on his jaw. Benny just said, "I was born talking back." When no one was around, he'd polish an old switchblade kept behind the counter. Not to use, just to remember. He didn't cry for Dutch. Didn't toast him. He survived him. And in the underworld, that's the only epitaph that matters. Thomas Dewey rose fast. Became district attorney. Then governor. Some whispered the Dutch case made him. Others said he got lucky. But every time he passed the courthouse steps, he remembered the day he nearly died. Dutch had been close. Too close. Dewey kept the rose Dutch sent locked in a drawer, pressed between Bible pages. Not as a trophy, but a reminder that monsters wear suits. That some victories are bought with someone else's blood. When asked if Dutch had been the worst of them, Dewey once replied, "No, just the most tragic. Because behind every madman is a child who was never saved." Years passed. Dutch faded from headlines, then from whispers. But in the back alleys and smoky corners of New York, his ghost lingered. Young hustlers spoke his name like a myth. A warning. Dutch didn't bend. Dutch didn't break. Dutch burned. His story became a lesson etched in shadow. Power without loyalty is suicide. Violence without purpose is noise. And empires built on fear crumble from within. Dutch Schultz didn't die when the bullet hit. He died the moment he believed he was untouchable. And in that, he became eternal, not as a king, but as a caution. New York moves on. But it never forgets. They found his teeth before they found his name. That line was whispered again 20 years later by a rookie detective at the academy. It had become legend. The alley was still there, narrow, cold, forgotten. But the city had changed. The blood had dried, the snow no longer fell as softly, and neon no longer flickered. But the fear, that lingered. They say ghosts don't haunt places, they haunt people. Dutch's ghost didn't scream. It watched. A silence that followed ambition. A breath behind every deal struck in shadow. His empire had fallen, but his story stayed. Not carved in marble, but etched in warning. His name never on a plaque, but always under the breath of anyone who wanted power without price. There are men who die once, and there are men who die forever. Dutch Schultz died again every time a new gangster rose without learning his name. Every time someone thought fear alone could build an empire. The commission never mentioned him in meetings. He was their failure, a reminder that chaos, unchecked, poisons the system. Dutch became a myth with no shrine. His crimes outlived him. His rules died with him. He wanted to be immortal. He got something worse. Forgotten by the world he ruled. Feared only in shadows. Echoed only in mistakes. The man who burned every bridge and then drowned in the flames. In a small used bookstore in Brooklyn, a dusty ledger once owned by Dutch surfaced. Untouched for decades. Inside, names, numbers, threats scribbled in violent shorthand. A historian bought it. Thought about writing a book, but never did. Something about it felt cursed. The pages smelled of smoke, of bourbon, of regret. He left it in a drawer. Said it kept him awake at night. Some stories aren't meant to be told. Some monsters shouldn't be summoned again. Dutch wrote his legacy in violence, and buried it in silence. And that silence, it still presses against the city's spine. In the end, Dutch wasn't remembered as a king, or a rebel, or even a criminal. He was remembered as a man who lost control. A man who mistook fear for loyalty. Power for permanence. In his final moments, lying in blood, he whispered fragments of dreams, confessions, ghosts. But no one listened. The world moved on. And maybe that's the price. Not death. Not hell. But being left behind by the very thing you tried to own. The city doesn't weep. It replaces. The skyline rises. The stories sink. And Dutch? He remains beneath them, not buried, but erased. There's no retirement plan for ghosts. That's what an old bartender once said when asked about Dutch Schultz. The bar's long gone now, but his words echo like a shot in the dark. Dutch didn't vanish. He became a lesson, a whispered curse, a fading warning in the eyes of every man who thinks he's untouchable. He walked into the funeral wearing the same suit he killed his father in. He smiled while the world burned. He kissed the girl and pulled the trigger in the same breath. Dutch didn't believe in endings. But he got one. Brutal, but inevitable, eternal. And when you pass that alley, that shadow, that silence, don't look back. Because Dutch is still watching. And he never forgives.